My recent video on Starfield was kinda down on Bethesda, and I got some pushback in my comments. I was expecting that. But what did surprise me was the number of commenters who took issue with the games I was comparing Bethesda games to, saying I was comparing action-adventure games to RPGs.
None of your example videos are RPGs. You're comparing two different entire genres. It's an RPG game, it's gonna have RPG systems. It seems you want Starfield to be an action game. Well, it's not an action game, it's an RPG. You did nothing but compare Starfield to shooters and action games. RPG mechanic literally means using numbers to represent actions, attributes, and skills. That's very literally what RPG means. RPGs shouldn't be action games.
So, since Bethesda games are RPGs, they can't and shouldn't have player mechanics such as evade, distract, drop attack, etc. Is that a rule? Also, what do you mean Bethesda games aren't action games? They are totally action games and RPGs. Someone should come up with a game genre that means action and RPG. But also, what does being an RPG have to do with combat mechanics? So I looked into it. And friends, this is a rabbit hole. Firstly, Bethesda games are not RPGs. They're action RPGs. Defined as games that emphasize real-time combat, where the player has direct control over characters as opposed to turn-based or menu-based combat. They often use action game combat systems, similar to hack and slash or shooter games. But action RPG is still an RPG. So what is an RPG as it pertains to video games? If you think you know, congratulations. So does everyone else, and no one can agree. Take note, however, that a game may fall into a genre and also into other genres and sit comfortably in both. For a fun exercise, I invite you to search, "Is blank an RPG?" The search results will likely lead you to Reddit or Quora, or some other discussion board where exactly zero consensus is being achieved. I've now perused many of these discussions, and in any of them, the following points will emerge, pretty much every time. Technically, any game with a defined protagonist is a role-playing game, so most games are RPGs. These people are only looking at the dictionary meaning of role-playing, and ignoring the origin of the role-playing game. Dungeons & Dragons was the first published RPG. It was played with a group of people around a table. Players typically controlled one character each, except for the game master, dungeon master, who guided the story, officiated the rules, and played all the NPCs. Combat was determined by a character's skill stats versus the enemy's stats, and the luck from dice rolls. RPGs first came to computers when fans started programming D&D rules into them. Random number generation and math were easy to program. The roleplay? Not so much. But saying all games with a character are RPGs is like saying the Terminator movies are dramas, because technically all movies are a composition intended to portray life or character, or to tell a story, usually involving conflicts and emotions through action and dialogue. But when we say a movie is a drama, we mean it has a serious tone or subject. Likewise, the RPG genre is more than the dictionary definition of role-playing. At the other extreme, there's often a person who comments, "No game is a true RPG, because true role-play disappeared with the Game Master when games were ported to computers." This person is technically correct. By getting rid of the Game Master, players could no longer be infinitely creative in how they role-played their characters. I can't say, "My dwarf rolls up the wizard's scroll and smokes it," because if the developers didn't program that option into the game, then that roleplay can't be carried out. But RPG is still widely used to describe a specific video game genre. So RPG has a meaning in video games beyond tabletop Dungeons & Dragons. The RPG quality most commonly submitted is, if it has XP and customizable stats, it's an RPG. It has to have a leveling system. What they're talking about is earning experience points and using those points to unlock abilities or strengthen existing ones. It's about customizing a character build by making them more of a magic user, more of a stealthy type, more of a swordsman, and so on. But other commenters are more stringent, suggesting if you can unlock all of the upgrades, then it has RPG elements, but it's not an RPG. It's only an RPG if you are forced into a custom build. So that's an interesting roadblock. Then there are those who contradict the stats fans, saying Having RPG elements does not equal an RPG. These people claim that having XP and customizable stats is not enough, because by that definition too many games would qualify. These commenters often fail to expound on what a game needs to have to satisfy the RPG qualification. This leads to, I think blank is an open-world action game with RPG elements, not an RPG, because the character's choices don't change the narrative of the game. What they're talking about is dialogue options and branching paths. Not just a choice of retorts in a conversation, but options that change the course of the story based on which reply was selected. These kinds of games come as close as computers can get, for now, to the original tabletop role-playing games. It's not just about accepting or rejecting quests. These choices may require the player to support one of various factions in a conflict, choose a party member for a fatal mission, or whether to lie or tell the truth in a situation. When branching story paths is brought up, someone else will often point out, JRPGs usually focus heavily on story and character, but often lack story choices that change the narrative. I have never played a JRPG, but this article attempts to define them, and spoilers, there are a lot of factors and divergent points of view. The article ultimately concludes that JRPGs are games that share a lot of commonality with other JRPGs. I'll link to the article below, but that's the last I'm going to say about them. Inevitably, someone will comment, the RPG label has become so diluted, it has truly lost all meaning. Variations on this comment include, the term has evolved over time to mean different things. It depends on who you ask. There is no set answer. And of course, who cares? Thanks to those people for contributing such valuable insight to the conversation. So here we are, with a spectrum of definitions for RPG. Be they action RPGs, computer RPGs, turn-based RPGs, massive multiplayer online RPGs, tactical RPGs, strategy RPGs, roguelike RPGs, and, oh you forgot one, RPGs. So when are games RPGs, and when are they not? If we accept this first definition of an RPG, then Mario Kart, Street Fighter, Cuphead, Firewatch, Inside, Portal, Neon White, and Power Wash Simulator are all RPGs, because in them you play a character. If we go by the definition that XP and customizable stats makes an RPG, then a lot of games often not considered RPGs qualify. Arkham Knight, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, Mad Max, Watch Dogs, most of the Far Cry games, Mirror's Edge Catalyst, God of War, Jedi Fallen Order, most dungeon crawlers, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Vampire Survivors, or any game without a level cap. All of these games, and many, many more, have experience points and skill trees to unlock. But what about characters that level up by improving their equipment and loadout rather than unlocking a skill tree? Like Subnautica, Metal Gear Solid 5, Breath of the Wild, Slime Rancher, Forza Horizon 5, Far Cry 6. Are they RPGs? Generally, people say no. So they are only RPGs if we're using the first definition. If we say only games where you can't unlock all the skills or can't max out all the stats get to be RPGs, then the Borderlands games, Diablo, Torchlight 2, and most games with level caps get to carry the RPG label. What about Total War Warhammer 3? Yes, it's a real-time strategy game, but can it also be an RPG? In Baldur's Gate, you controlled a diverse party of 6 characters. Does it cease to be an RPG if the party is now an army? Total War still has skills, leveling, and experience points, and you can't max out your stats in a single playthrough. Does that make Total War Warhammer 3 an RTS RPG? I'm going to say no, because the player doesn't assume the role of any one of the characters. Okay, if we say that an RPG has to have a story with branching paths, and/or meaningful dialogue options, and/or multiple endings, then the Dishonored games, Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, and Human Revolution, Disco Elysium, Fallout 4, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Mass Effect, Witcher 3, Dragon Age Origins, Cyberpunk 2077, Fable, and Prey all qualify. by the strictest definition of RPG. What about StarCraft II: Wings of Liberty? Yes, it is also an RTS. Your main character is Jim Raynor. It has stat-based leveling for the army, you can't unlock all the skills, and it has branching story paths, which affect the campaign and the endgame. Is StarCraft II an RTS RPG? Skyrim is an easy add to this group. I'm throwing Far Cry 4 into this elite tier also, because yes, it is an open-world first-person shooter. It also has experience points and a skill tree, but also has branching paths. Specifically, your character is forced to choose between the two rebel leaders multiple times, and the game has more than one ending. Elden Ring is a classic RPG, letting you dump points into stats to suit your playstyle, and although it doesn't have story-changing dialogue options, it does have 6 endings, some with requirements that have to be met before the end. That's branching paths. The new Guardians of the Galaxy also meets all qualifications: XP, stats, story paths. However, if you stipulate that a game can't allow you to unlock all skills, then all 4 of these titles are disqualified as RPGs, because a dedicated player can max out all skills. It's noteworthy that games like Life is Strange, with its multiple story paths, especially regarding character relationships, and Detroit Become Human, with its 85 possible endings, are 2 examples of games that are probably more roleplay than any of the other hardcore RPGs already mentioned. Yet, because they lack experience points and stat-based leveling, they are rebranded as interactive narratives, or some other genre label because, surprise, there isn't consensus there either. Point is, without the stat-based leveling, they're not RPGs. A couple other questions. If stats are based more on equipment, like a faster hoverboard, instead of character perks like the ability to smell plaids, does it cease to be an RPG? Or is that an evolution of the RPG? Asking for a friend. If it has XP, skill stats, dialogue options, and branching paths, but doesn't have inventory management, is that enough to kick it out of the RPG club? Is it now only a game with RPG elements? What if it has an infinite inventory? Does an RPG have to include crafting? What about world exploration? Can an RPG have a mostly linear map? Inevitably, when a game gets classified into a genre, there are opinions about whether that game actually fits that genre, followed by questions about whether said genre needs to chill out and be more accepting of variety. In Mark Brown's brilliant essay, Do We Need a Souls-like Genre?, he observes,
"But when we turn a game into a genre, that game can become a formula that all developers end up following in pretty much the same way. We judge new games by their ability to emulate the original. We erase the contributions of other important games that were exploring the same territory, and because we keep coming back to the same game over and over again, the pace of innovation can grind to a halt. It's the difference between someone saying, hey, I'm going to use Metroid as a base and build something new, and a cottage industry of developers all doing the same thing for years and years and years. So while genres can be very useful, I'd argue that we want them to be as broad as possible, and not narrowly defined by many of the mechanics of a single landmark game."
When Diablo, Deus Ex, and Disco Elysium can all be called RPGs, and yet have so little in common, it suggests the RPG classification holds little value. By looking at the properties of the undisputed RPGs, there are some other conclusions we might extract. An RPG can exist in any setting. It can be a fantasy like Dishonored, or science fiction like Mass Effect, or historical like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or in pseudo-modern times like Disco Elysium. RPGs can be any POV, including isometric, top-down, first and third person, and text-based. Games like The Ascent or Diablo demonstrate that an RPG can be very combat-heavy. Elden Ring shows RPGs can have strong, user-controlled combat mechanics, without being reliant on numbers. The Deus Ex games are RPGs with strong stealth mechanics, and takedowns. So while we're still trying to nail down exactly what constitutes an RPG versus an RPG-like game, I'm satisfied that the reason Bethesda games don't have more complex combat or stealth mechanics is not because they are RPGs, but because that's just not the kind of game Bethesda wanted to make, or was able to make. So what is an RPG? What must an RPG contain to be an RPG? versus just a game with RPG elements? Or is the term in fact so diluted it has truly lost all meaning? I'll be following your comments. What are the necessary elements of an RPG? What is your evidence? And what games does your definition necessarily include or exclude from the RPG club? What games qualify for RPG that people generally don't consider RPGs? Can you think of any game that's often considered an RPG that doesn't meet the standard? Please comment, please be respectful, and thanks for watching.